Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us at the first session of the Community Choice Track at the MDF 2020 Virtual Conference. My name is Emily Jones, and I began the support group in New York State Finger Lakes region in 2015 after my son and grandson were diagnosed with DM1 in 2014. I am very excited to introduce you to clinical dietitian Sara Kevern, who is going to talk with us about optimizing nutrition in support of individuals with myotonic dystrophy. Sara is a registered dietitian and a nutrition support specialist at Stanford Healthcare and Stanford Children's Health. She joined the Neuromuscular team in 2019 to inaugurate and build nutrition services. She works as part of the multi-disciplinary clinic with both adult and pediatric patients to help optimize their nutrition. Sara completed her training at Ohio University and has been practicing as a clinical registered dietitian since 2011. As nutrition is a huge issue for both my son and my grandson, I am really looking forward to hearing what I can do to encourage change in their eating habits. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Sara Kevern. Sara?
Thank you, Emily, for the introduction, and hello, everybody that's joined. So I'm going to share my screen in just a second, but thought it might be nice to see my face so you can put a voice to the face. And I will also mention that I will be taking questions at the end. If you have a question during the presentation, go ahead and write it in, but I won't be answering it till the end, so just sit tight. All right? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that. So today what we're going to talk about is first of all, the basics of human nutrition. So we're going to go over a lot of this and sort of build a base of knowledge before we go on to talk about supplements. And in that section, we'll talk about what to take, when to take it, things to look out for and be careful of. And then finally, with all that baseline info, we'll finish up talking about nutrition concerns that are specific to the myotonic dystrophy population. So some of this may be a review for some of you. Hopefully you'll at least learn one thing. So in terms of nutrition basics, nutrition or food is comprised of macronutrients and micronutrients. The macronutrients provide us with energy or calories. And these two words, energy and calories, I'm going to use somewhat interchangeably during this talk. Calories are really a unit of energy, similar to like how an inch is a unit of length when we talk about measuring things. So energy and calories are basically the same thing when we're talking about food and nutrition. Now the macronutrients are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Those three nutrients do provide different calories per the amount that you eat. So for every 1 gram of carbohydrate and 1 gram of protein, you get 4 calories. With fats, for every gram of fat you eat, you get 9 calories. So you can see that fats do provide more energy than the other two micronutrients, but overall, they provide us with energy. Micronutrients do not provide energy. They don't contain calories, but they do perform essential functions in the body. And the micronutrient groups are vitamins and minerals. Then we have this antioxidants phytochemicals group that don't provide energy and they don't perform essential functions in the body, but they do assist in keeping cells healthy, so they are still very important. Okay, so let's talk about the macronutrients. So carbohydrates really need a moment of silence because they have just a terrible reputation. However, carbohydrates are the body's favorite form of energy. They are digested very easily, they are converted to energy very easily, and that energy is used very easily by the body. So they really are the body's favorite form, but a lot of people are scared of carbs. So we'll talk about that. We get carbohydrates from mostly plants and dairy. You won't really find a lot of carbohydrates in meats, poultry, fish, or eggs. So we get them from grains, beans, legumes, potatoes, peas, lentils, and fruits, and also milk. Milk products do contain carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates themselves are very large molecules, and they're too big to absorb into the bloodstream as they are. So during digestion, our digestive enzymes break those carbohydrates into glucose, which is that smallest form or piece of a carbohydrate. And glucose, I will probably use the term sugar interchangeably with glucose during this presentation. So essentially, glucose is a type of sugar, and it is the most basic form of a carbohydrate and is able to be absorbed because it's very small. So once that glucose is absorbed into the bloodstream, that glucose gets circulated around the body to the brain, the muscles, and all of our tissues. So the brain will use that glucose for energy. The brain loves glucose, and the muscles use it as well for energy. Now, if there's too much glucose and the muscles aren't using all of it, then our blood sugar is going to be higher because more of that glucose stays in the blood. And if we're still not using it, then that glucose will be stored as fat. And I think this is where a lot of people are afraid of carbohydrates, because while it is the body's favorite form of energy, it's also very easily stored as fat if we eat too much of it. So carbohydrates are important for energy, they're easy to use, but too much gets stored as fat. Now, fiber is technically a carbohydrate. So if you look at the food label, under the total carbohydrate section, you'll notice fiber falls in that area. However, fiber is not digested by the body. Our digestive enzymes are not strong enough to digest it. It is a plant-derived polysaccharide, which is a type of carbohydrate, but we just can't break it down. So what that means is that when we eat fiber, it slows down digestion, which stimulates blood sugar, or it stabilizes blood sugar, and it also can help keep us regular. There are two types of fiber. There's insoluble and soluble fiber. So soluble fiber absorbs a lot of water and turns into almost like a gel consistency. And what this does is it slows down the gastric emptying and increases our stool thickness. So as you can imagine, soluble fiber is probably not the best form of fiber to eat if you're constipated, because it will kind of slow everything down. Sources of soluble fiber are oats, barley, nuts, apples, blueberries, and then anytime you see the terms psyllium or inulin, those are two forms of soluble fiber. This is not an all-inclusive list, but these are some of the most common food sources of soluble fiber. Then there's insoluble fiber. This one does help with constipation. You still need to drink a lot of water with it, but it does not absorb water in the way that soluble fiber does. And the reason that that helps is that it moves things through our digestive tract much quicker, but you do need that water to help push it through. Sources of insoluble fiber are things like seeds, the skins of fruit, wheat bran, fibrous veggies, and so some terms you might see that mean insoluble fiber are lignans and cellulose. So you'll notice that in the soluble fiber food sources, you see an apple, but I said that skins of fruit are insoluble. So what that means is that that inside of the apple is soluble fiber and the skin is insoluble fiber. So that, a lot of fruits are like that. They contain both types. So in terms of fiber supplements, most of them contain mostly soluble fiber. So Metamucil, for example, is psyllium, which you see above is soluble fiber. A lot of them do have both types, but it's almost impossible to know how much of each type of fiber is in a fiber supplement. The reason I bring this up is that a lot of times when I talk to people, they want to know which fiber supplement to take for constipation. And If you are already constipated or having an acute bout of constipation, I don't recommend fiber supplements. They are really better used routinely to help maintain a normal bowel schedule. So that's fiber. I'm going to take a drink of water, 1 second. Okay. So moving on to protein. Protein is very popular. People love to talk about protein. People love to eat protein. It's probably the most popular macronutrient. It does provide energy, which we know all macronutrients do. However, protein is also really the building blocks of our muscles and our skeletal muscles, our smooth muscles, and many other tissues. So our big biceps, our skeletal muscle, our smooth muscles are our organs. Our heart is a very strong muscle that needs protein. And then other tissues like nails, hair, things like that are made up of proteins as well. So similar to carbohydrates, proteins are too big to absorb in their main form. So during digestion, our enzymes break those proteins down into amino acids, which are the smallest pieces of a protein that can be absorbed into the bloodstream. Once those amino acids are in the blood, they get circulated around to all those different tissues where they get repackaged as full proteins that are needed, whatever the location is. So if you just did a big workout, those amino acids are going to go to your big bicep, repackage itself as skeletal muscle, and help rebuild that muscle. Same thing, ongoing basis, your proteins or your amino acids are going to go to your nails and hair, which are constantly growing, and you're going to be creating proteins out of those amino acids for your skin and hair. Proteins can be used as energy. This is a process called gluconeogenesis, or glucose new creation. So what happens is when the body does not have enough carbohydrate or enough glucose, we are able to take an amino acid and turn it into glucose to use for energy. Now you can probably imagine that this is not ideal because that will take those amino acids away from the tissues that really need them to rebuild. So while we can use proteins as energy, it's not ideal. And that's why carbohydrates, we still love those for energy. Proteins do come from both plant and animal sources. So animal sources of proteins are meats and poultry, fish, eggs, dairy. And then plants, we have soy, which comes in many forms, tofu, edamame, tempeh, soy milk. You know, there's a million different soy products out there. Nuts and seeds, beans and legumes, dark leafy greens. Whole grains are also somewhat high in protein. So it is very possible, it's actually completely possible for a vegetarian person to get enough protein from plants. The more important thing for vegetarians is that they're eating a variety of these plant sources to make sure they're getting all the essential amino acids. But that is a common misconception that vegetarians are protein deficient, and most of them are not. If they are, they just might not know how to eat properly. So that's protein. Okay, moving on to the third and final macronutrient, which is our fats. So fats, we used to have to mourn for them, but they've had a resurgence. I'm very happy for fats. A lot of people used to be scared of them, but people are really finding, you know, a lot of the benefits from healthy fats. So in addition to energy, fats also provide a lot of satiety or satisfaction. A lot of flavor in our food comes from fat. And when we have a diet or a meal that's low in fat, we tend to feel less satisfied. So a very important function of fat. Fats also help with hormone production and signaling. We also have fats in our cell membranes that keep them very fluid and soft. Fats are from plants and animals. Some plant sources are avocados, nuts, seeds, olives, plant oils, which we see a lot of. And then animals, meats and poultry contain fats, fish, dairy, and eggs. Now you can probably imagine plant and animal sources of fat do vary in terms of what types of fats are in them, and the type of fat does matter. So saturated fats may negatively impact heart health, and we know that trans fats are very unhealthy and In fact, they're banned in this country. So it's important to kind of avoid trans fats as much as possible. With the food labeling laws, there may be a food label that says 0 trans fats. However, if you look in the ingredient list and you see anything that says hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated oils, those are trans fats. And there's not enough in the food for it to register on the food label as like 1/2 gram or a full gram. So they're allowed to put 0. And so that's why it's important to still read the ingredient list to look for trans fats. Poly and monounsaturated fats can actually reduce inflammation and improve our heart health, and those mainly come from plant foods. So the type of fat matters, but we all need fat in our diet. Okay, so moving on to the micronutrients. I love this picture. It's so pretty. The rainbow effect here is really key when we talk about micronutrients, and we will come back to that later. Excuse me. So we'll talk about vitamins first. There are 2 kinds, fat-soluble and water-soluble vitamins. The fat-soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K. That basically means that those vitamins can be stored in our body. And so we do have to be a little bit more careful about supplementing those because it's possible to get toxic levels of them. The water-soluble vitamins are the B vitamins and vitamin C. And water-soluble means that we cannot store these vitamins, and so any excess that you eat or take in supplement form, you will excrete in the urine. And that's kind of important to keep in mind if you're thinking about supplementing the water-soluble vitamins, because they're very easy to get from food. And if you're paying money for those vitamins, you're probably just peeing them out. So it's something to kind of think about. And I listed the B vitamins because they all have their own fancy names. And you might kind of wonder what the relationship is. And there's just, the B vitamins are numbered, but they do have an actual name as well. So if you've ever wondered what thiamine is, riboflavin, they're just B vitamins. Okay, so vitamins are important coenzymes for metabolism. So what that means, metabolism is a chemical reaction that turns our food into fuel or energy. And so after digestion, when we take those teeny tiny pieces of things, of glucose, of amino acids, etc., we have chemical reactions that require coenzymes that turn those foods, those tiny pieces of foods, into actual usable energy. And that's what metabolism is. They're also very important for our immune system, keeping it healthy. They're important to help us mineralize our bones and keep our bones nice and strong. Vitamin K particularly helps with blood clotting. And we get vitamins from both plants and animals, and we also get them from fortified foods. So a really good example of this is a breakfast cereal. If you read the ingredients, you'll see a ton of vitamins added. And that was, I forget what decade that was implemented, but here in the US, we started fortifying a lot of breakfast cereals and breads and things like that, just to eliminate any vitamin deficiencies in the population. All right, moving on to minerals. These are a little bit more boring. So we have potassium, sodium, calcium, phos, mag, chlorine, and sulfur. And then we have these trace minerals as well. One thing I want to point out about minerals is that the content of a food of minerals varies by the soil content. So what that means is in a lot of our very industrial farms here in the US, where the land is farmed and not really replenished with compost or crop rotation or bumper crops or things like that, the soil can become very deficient in nutrients, and that will affect the mineral content of food. That's not true for necessarily vitamins or macronutrients, but it is true for minerals. So that's why we talk a lot about growing your own food when possible, buying produce from small local farms that, have good farming practices that replenish the soil. But a lot of the fertilizers that we use here in the US, we use in order to repopulate the soil with a lot of those good nutrients. Composting is another way to do that, but not quite as cost effective. So the big industrial farms tend to use fertilizers. Minerals function as electrolytes. So potassium, sodium, calcium, phos, all those first ones function as our electrolytes in our body. Some of them are antioxidants. Some of them help with enzyme production. Some help with cell signaling. And minerals, similar to vitamins, are found in both plants and animals, and also, again, in fortified foods. Okay, so moving on to antioxidants. Again, they don't provide energy and they don't serve an essential function in the body. However, antioxidants do help protect our cells against damage. What this means is that it can help reduce cancer and heart disease risk. So while they don't have essential functions, they're still very important. Some of the micronutrients we talked about actually function as antioxidants. So vitamins A, C, and E, the mineral selenium, and then we have these things called phytochemicals in our foods that also function as antioxidants. We find them mostly in plants, and we've had a few studies now that show that supplementation of these antioxidants may not be as effective as getting them from food, and it may actually in some cases be counterproductive, where not only does it not protect our cells, but it can actually damage them. So some of the reasoning behind this has to do with other chemicals in food that interact with those antioxidants that, you know, help them work as protective chemicals. And so when you go isolating a supplement and putting it into a pill, you don't have those other chemicals that work together. I do want to note that this picture here is not all-inclusive. There are a ton of foods that have antioxidants. As a rule of thumb, these really colorful ones, like the red cabbage, the blueberries, the strawberries, the colorful ones are where you get those phytochemicals. And so that's why, if you remember the picture on my vitamin slide of the heart and the rainbow, eating the rainbow is very important to get those phytochemicals. Okay, so after all this baseline information, you might be thinking, well, what exactly does that mean? What is a healthy diet? And the term healthy and health in general is very hard for me as a dietitian because it means something very different for everybody. And so when we think of health or overall health, I love this picture because it shows, you know, we've got our carrot, our strawberry, our broccoli. So we know, you know, healthy food is important. But then there's also, you know, some aspects of nature. We see the picture of the mountains and the trees. We see a bike for exercise. We see music, which could represent, you know, a social life or just, you know, the enjoyment of the arts, things like that. There's also, not pictured here, is family and community, spirituality, you know, all of those things go into health, and diet is just one piece. And so it's important to remember that. And I would love for you to take a moment to kind of think about, what does the term healthy mean to you and for you? And then in terms of diet, how would you rate yourself right now in your current way of eating? How would you rate yourself based on your definition of a healthy diet? So just think about that for a second while I take a sip of water. Okay. So while you think about your definition of a healthy diet, I'll talk about kind of what that means from a dietitian's perspective. So what I think of with a healthy diet is one that is varied in types of foods. So we talked about all the different sources of carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and micronutrients, and you see that they all have something to offer. And so if we're eating a diet that's varied in all these types of foods, we know that we're getting a great variety of nutrients. A healthy diet also emphasizes whole, minimally processed foods. So I know that cutting a cucumber into julienne slices is technically processed, but that's not what I mean. What I mean is something, you know, food that we take, we strip it down to something and then we add a bunch of stuff to it. That's what I mean by processed. So the more foods that we eat in their whole form, the better. Also incorporates many different plants. So fruits, veggies, beans, nuts, seeds, legumes. We know that that plants have a lot of fiber, number one, a lot of vitamins and minerals that you don't necessarily get from animal products. A healthy diet is one that has an appropriate macronutrient breakdown to provide you with optimal energy levels. This is different for everybody. Some people do really well on a high carb diet. Some people need a low carb diet, and it's very individual. So whatever macronutrient breakdown works for you is healthy for you. In terms of calories, it's an appropriate level to maintain your weight, but also to provide satisfaction and pleasure with your meals. So not restrictive, but also, that you're not overeating to the point where you're uncomfortable, to the point where you're gaining weight rapidly. And that, again, is different for everybody. And finally, but maybe most importantly, a healthy diet is one that allows for proper social and cultural enjoyment. So if you find that you're trying to maintain a somewhat strict diet to the point where you're not enjoying it with people you love, or you're restricting your favorite foods, or you're not enjoying culturally important foods to you, then it's probably not healthy, regardless of the food content. So that's how I would define a healthy diet. It's very subjective and very individualized, but that's exactly what it is. Nobody's the same. Okay, in terms of structuring meals, this can sometimes help a lot of people to know kind of the breakdown of what they should be eating to help get to that calorie level that's appropriate for them. So in general, I would say half of your plate should be those plants, those fruits and veggies. And that's because we know that if you're eating that much of those fruits and veggies, you're getting fiber and you're getting micronutrients. And about a quarter of it should be your carbohydrates, which can be grains, but can also be, beans or lentils or something like that. And then a quarter of it is your protein. And so the reason this helps is because if you really think about it, about half of your plate is macronutrients and half is focusing more on the micronutrients and fiber. And then dairy is optional. That's just there. You don't have to have dairy with every meal. Okay, so let's take a look at this picture. This is a good way to kind of gauge whether or not you're adding macro or micronutrients. So the picture on the left where we have our chicken and potatoes, very clearly we have protein and carbohydrate in that picture. There's some red in the skins of the potatoes, which is great, but overall it's not super colorful. It's a little bit beige, and the whole plate is chicken and potatoes. Now, if we look at the one on the right, we have about half of the plate is cucumber and broccolini, which is our color. And then we still have the chicken and potatoes, but about 50% of that meal is veggies, and then 50% is the chicken and potatoes. So as a rule of thumb, what you would do is decide what your main course is and then add color so that your plate looks a little bit like that one on the right. And then you're getting vitamins, minerals, and fiber. Okay, let's talk about supplements. This is a huge topic. One of the biggest questions I get from the myotonic dystrophy community is about supplements. So I'll just start off by saying there is no known supplement to benefit the myotonic dystrophy population. There isn't one that we know has a blanket benefit. So in terms of deciding whether or not to take supplements, it's really important to meet with a dietitian so that they can identify with you if your diet is lacking in certain foods, like if you don't eat green stuff, or you are a vegetarian but you've never really learned how to eat. That's one case where you want to make sure that you're not lacking a specific food group. You can use supplements if you do have a proven deficiency. Most of us in North America are vitamin D deficient. So if you don't spend a lot of time in the sun, you should probably be taking vitamin D. Basically, any neuromuscular disorder should be taking vitamin D. So that's a really important one. Other than that, other supplements to consider would be, just a multivitamin with minerals. And that will ensure that you're missing any gaps in micronutrients. If you think that, you don't eat a whole lot of veggies, or, you're not making a whole lot of foods at home, just a multivitamin with minerals will cover basically everything. If you don't eat a lot of fish, then, omega-3 fish oil supplement can be a good idea. I did already talk about vitamin D. It's so important for bone health. And then you can consider taking fiber if you want to try to get more regular, or probiotics if you think that you have sort of an imbalance in your gut flora. You can get probiotics from foods as well, but acidophilus is a pretty popular probiotic supplement if you're looking to kind of change your gut flora. So those are the ones I generally recommend on an individual basis. But some of the letter vitamins, you know, like I mentioned, those B's and the C that are water soluble, you know, they're so easy to get from food, and you will almost never see a deficiency in those vitamins in our country. So I generally don't recommend individual letter vitamins. If you're concerned about a specific one, a multivitamin can really cover that. Okay, so one of the issues with supplements that it's important to consider is that they are not regulated by our government. So the actual nutrient content of that supplement can vary. It may or may not reflect what they say, you know, what's on the bottle in terms of the content. Even from pill to pill can vary. The statements on those supplements are not evaluated. A good example of this that I see a lot is B vitamin supplements for energy. And, you know, we already talked about micronutrients. Vitamins do not provide energy. They don't have calories. So where can they come from making this statement? Well, B vitamins are coenzymes in that metabolism process where we're turning food into energy. So technically you need B vitamins for energy, right? But they don't actually provide energy. So you take this truth and kind of twist it and sell a product. So it's very important to be aware of those types of statements. Another one is caffeine for energy. Caffeine has no calories, so it does not actually give you energy. It is a stimulant, so it might make you feel energetic, but it does not provide energy. Okay. And again, I mentioned this when we talked about antioxidants, but a lot of these nutrients in food work together with other natural chemicals in food to help them with the function that they have in the body. So isolating these nutrients and putting them in a supplement may or may not have the same effect as eating that food. So the bottom line is that it's always best to eat real food, get your nutrients from that. If you have a proven deficiency or some sort of malabsorption syndrome, that's a totally different story. But in general, you know, supplements are not always necessary. Okay, so we're going to move on to some of the nutrition challenges with the myotonic dystrophy community. Okay, so first one is dysphagia. And this is basically defined as difficulty swallowing. And that can be related to either weakness in the muscles in the mouth and the throat, or it could be secondary to difficulty chewing, also related to weakness. And the severity of this can vary person to person. So we have a speech language pathologist or an OT, occupational therapist, that will kind of examine you, ask you questions, do a clinical exam about your swallowing, and can give you some safe swallowing strategies and some suggestions for altering your diet if needed, at which point I or the dietitian will work with that SLP or OT to come up with an appropriate diet, both in consistency as well as in quality and types of foods, in order to make sure that you have a safe diet, but also a very nutritious diet. And I do want to point out that a modified diet can still be very nutritious and fun. So, you know, varying the foods that you're eating and using some of your favorite recipes is possible. You just have to modify the texture. So whether that means, you know, chopping it into smaller pieces, or, you know, blending things, or adding sauces and gravies to make it softer, things like that. You don't have to completely change the way you're eating. You can still eat a lot of your favorite things. You just have to modify the texture. So getting creative, you know, is kind of important. Okay, next one is energy levels. So with myotonic dystrophy, you know, if you're feeling weak or fatigued, this may really impede your ability to prepare meals. You can try shortcuts like using a food processor to avoid having to chop things, using pre-made or pre-cooked foods, using, you know, for example, egg whites in a carton, things like that. And I want to take a minute to shout out two of our community members. I'm not sure if they're on this, but Dean Sage and Jay Jones, who were our winners for the nutrition cooking contest. And Dean had made a roasted red pepper soup that he put in his Vitamix and made it dysphagia puree friendly, actually. And then Jay made an omelet, and he had this awesome shortcut where he took like a frozen vegetable medley and put them in his food processor. And then I think he put them in either, it was either ice cube trays or a muffin tin. He portioned them out and then froze them like that. So when he would go to cook, he would have these pre-portioned chopped up veggies ready to go. And it was so awesome. And then he also used egg whites in a carton for his omelet. And so, you know, finding shortcuts like that can really help you prepare meals when you're just feeling tired. So shout out to you guys, you're awesome. I think those videos are still available on the Friday afternoon webinar series. There was one, oh gosh, it was either May or June about food prep. So go check them out. There's some really good ideas in there. Okay, going back to energy, you may require an adjustment in your macronutrients. So if you're just not feeling any better, you're not feeling energetic when you eat, you might need, you know, more carbs, fewer carbs, something like that. And talking to a dietitian, you can really help kind of isolate that issue. And again, caffeine. If you're not feeling energetic, caffeine may worsen your sleepiness. It's false energy, does not provide calories. It is a stimulant, so you'll feel good for a while, but it's not going to fix the underlying issue. Okay, moving on to changes in appetite. So some people tend to have a decrease in appetite. Of course, the opposite can also be true, but if you are in sort of a slump where you're just not hungry, but you do need to eat regularly, it's important to kind of vary your food just to keep things interesting. If you're eating the same thing day after day, it's not going to be very appealing. Trying to use a lot of flavor, spices, sauces, things like that can help as well. And, you know, give yourself some grace. Eat what sounds good. So whether that's pictured here, burger and fries, candy, something like that, if that's all that sounds good and your appetite's not great, that's okay. And when your appetite comes back, you can focus on, you know, eating good quality foods. But, you know, one day you're having some trouble, it's okay. If you feel like your appetite is low because of your mood and you're having some issues with that, talk to your doctor, because you have to eat. We all do. And, you know, if we can help kind of fix your mood, then that's, you know, two great things that we can do for you at once. All right, GI challenges. I hear this one a lot. We did talk quite a bit about fiber earlier, but it's important to keep in mind that you need a balance of fiber and fluid. So if you're eating a whole lot of fiber, but you're not increasing your fluid intake, it may actually have the opposite effect. It's possible that that fiber will just kind of plug you up if you don't have enough water to flush things through. So fluid needs do vary. Most adults should get at least 2 liters, which is the same thing as 8 8-ounce cups. And fiber needs, the recommendation for Americans is 25 to 38 grams a day. This does vary. If you're a smaller person, you need less. If you're a bigger person, you need more. But shooting for that range is a good starting point. Probiotics, again, you know, if you think that you have an issue with your gut flora, trying to incorporate some probiotic foods like yogurt, kombucha, kimchi, kefir, tempeh, those all have really great probiotics. Sauerkraut's another one. You can also take probiotic supplements. Again, I had mentioned acidophilus is a very popular one to take. Movement can help with constipation. Talk to your PT. It might be, you know, certain types of movement or positioning or things like that that can help. And you just might require bowel regulating medications. And that's okay. It's important that you're going to the bathroom regularly, that you're comfortable and you're not getting stomach aches, things like that. So if you need a little bit of help from medications, that's totally fine. That can be part of, you know, a healthy diet as well. Okay, weight gain or loss. The issues that I hear with this vary. So some people really need to gain weight. It's difficult with myotonic dystrophy because, you know, just eating protein alone is not going to increase muscle mass. So, you know, you need protein and exercise to help with that. But in general, to gain weight, you need to increase your calorie intake. So this can be by adding high calorie items to food, which generally means high fat foods. As we mentioned earlier, fats are 9 calories per gram. So you're really going to get the biggest bang for your buck if you're eating fats. So cheese, avocado, peanut butter, things like that. If you're just feeling really full and you're finding it difficult to increase your calorie intake, then eating smaller but more frequently meals will help with that. And then you can also use a high calorie beverage. There are commercial supplements available like Ensure. You can also make a homemade milkshake that can pretty much achieve the same goal of giving you additional calories. The key really with this is that you're using it in addition to the food that you're eating rather than as a meal replacement. If you start using beverages as a meal replacement, you're probably not going to be increasing your total calories. Okay, if you need to lose weight, it's kind of the opposite. So decreasing your total calorie intake, and one way you can sort of work towards this is by trying to eat more fruits and vegetables. And that's because those will make you feel more full without giving you a whole lot of calories. So if you're eating more fruits and veggies, you're more likely to eat less carbs, fat, and protein. And that can help you achieve that lower calorie intake without feeling too restricted. If you're able to, increasing activity will help you burn more calories. That can help with weight loss as well. But if this is something you struggle with, either one, meeting with a dietitian can really help, you know, hone in on very specific things for you to try working on. Okay, and then this one is pretty popular topic. So insulin resistance, which if you're not familiar with the term, can be sort of like diabetes, but not necessarily. So insulin is a hormone that I like to think of it as a key that unlocks our cell walls. So when we digest carbohydrates and we get that glucose or sugar, and that sugar enters the bloodstream and floats around to all of your tissues, that sugar will kind of knock on the door of the cell, and the insulin will be like, oh, hey, sugar, what's up? Yes, you can come in. And the insulin will open the door into the cell. The sugar will go into the cell where it is then used as energy. So in myotonic dystrophy or insulin resistance in general, the cells can be resistant to that insulin, which means when the sugar knocks on that door, the insulin says, hey, go away. I don't want you to come in. And so then the sugar stays in the blood. And this is what we call insulin resistance. And because the sugar is not getting into the cells, it stays in the blood and we see higher blood glucose levels. This might be due to a higher fat to muscle ratio in myotonic dystrophy. So muscle cells are metabolically active. They really like sugar. They will use it for energy. And so if you have less muscle and you have more fat, which is not metabolically active, then you're using less sugar in general. And so more of it is going to stay in the blood. So some ways to combat this: if you're able to increase your activity, your muscles are going to burn up more sugar. And so that's going to make the cells a little bit more responsive to that insulin because it's going to want that sugar. So activity helps. Limiting added sugars in your diet will help decrease your blood sugar. So I put this picture up of many different added sugars that really are created equal. So there's a lot of confusion around, you know, things like honey, maple syrup, agave nectar, because they're sort of touted as healthier, but they're still sugar. So in this picture, it looks like we've got some sugar in the raw, coconut sugar, maybe brown sugar, agave nectar, maple syrup, corn syrup, white sugar, and they all are the same thing. They're going to have the same effect on your blood sugar. And so limiting those added sugars will help your overall blood glucose levels. And finally, I mean, you might just have to adjust your macronutrients. If you have high blood sugar and you just can't get it down, it might be that you have to decrease your carbohydrate intake. But again, working with a dietitian, they can kind of help you pinpoint that, whether or not whether or not it's an issue. You don't have to figure that out on your own. Okay, so take a minute to kind of think about you or someone you know with myotonic dystrophy, what their greatest nutrition-related challenge might be, and see if you can kind of think of a potential solution or change you could make to kind of fix that. And then we'll go ahead and take questions. I'm going to stop sharing here. Okay, so it looks like we got a question from Kristen. A lot of us with myotonic dystrophy have trouble swallowing pills. Are there a lot of supplements in liquid or chewable form? Oh, there are a lot available. So there's definitely pediatric forms that are liquid and chewable. If that's the case, you might have to take a double dose. But most, I mean, vitamin D, there's liquid forms, multivitamins, there's a ton of different chewable forms. If you're having trouble finding one, you can try asking your doctor to write a prescription for a specific vitamin that's a liquid form, and then you can fill it at the pharmacy if you can't find it over the counter at CVS or a grocery store. Good question. I saw a couple of people raise their hands, but I don't see any other questions. All right, here's one from Frank. Those of us with GI diseases that at any given time can't tolerate to eat anything, other ideas? So GI issues that are preventing you from eating, that can really vary or run the gamut. If you have like an acute illness, then the focus should be maintaining your electrolyte intake. So using some kind of sports drink like Gatorade, just to make sure that you're not getting dehydrated. That's the #1 concern. If it's a short period of time, chances of you becoming malnourished are pretty low. But if it's a long period of time, then kind of fixing the underlying issue is going to be very important. If it's a pancreatic issue, you may need enzymes. So that's something to talk to the doctor about. Okay, we're getting a bunch of questions, so I'm gonna. From Phoebe, would buying organic foods help with the mineral content variation? Not necessarily. So organic only means that those crops are sprayed with only an approved list of pesticides. So it doesn't really have anything to do with the soil. You don't have to have organic pesticides, let's see, if you use compost or you rotate your crops, you can still be non-organic. So what really matters is that you're kind of buying locally from smaller farms that you know have good farming and soil practices. From Lynn, has there been any research done on veganism and DM? I found that meat and dairy are very inflammatory, so have become vegan. Not that I know of. I don't think there's specific research, but that's a great example of how diet is very individual, and people have very different reactions to different diets. And so Lynn, who feels she gets more inflammation from meat and dairy, has found a way around that by eating vegan. And that's completely fine. And I'm happy to hear that you found something that works for you. If you are going to choose to be vegan or vegetarian, just making sure you do your research so that you're getting all the nutrients you need. The biggest thing for vegans is B12. So I always suggest that a vegan takes B12 supplements. Okay, Phoebe, one of my concerns is losing muscle when trying to lose fat. Are there any tips to keep your muscle mass when trying to lose fat? So a lot of people worry about this, that when you are in a calorie deficit, which is what's required to lose weight, that your body will start using protein for energy and you'll see a decrease in muscle tone. And that's definitely not necessary when you're losing weight. You don't have to go into this muscle catabolism. That's what you want to avoid. So the best way to do that while you're losing weight is to make sure that you're still eating at regular intervals. So even if your meals are lower calorie, if you're still eating, every 4 hours or so, that's going to prevent your muscles from breaking down because you will be providing your body with a steady flow of energy throughout the day. Is it possible to obtain a copy of these slides? I believe it's going to be recorded and I believe it will be on the website. How do you feel about natural supplements like L-theanine green tea extract to help with energy? So again, energy is calories, right? So green tea extract or itself is a stimulant and it's going to provide a temporary feeling of energy similar to caffeine, but it's not going to provide sustained energy. So it's the same principle. You need to make sure you're eating adequate calories for a steady flow of energy. What's healthy in a healthy diet, something we can do. So Mindy, I'm not sure I understand your question, but I think you're basically asking is how to create a healthy diet for yourself. And again, I recommend meeting with a dietitian to help outline exactly what that means for you. Bloating and stomach issues with DM1, what can I do to help with these symptoms? So bloating and stomach issues can be caused by many different things. It could be certain things you're eating in the diet. It could be if you've been on antibiotics and never took a probiotic afterwards. It might be an imbalance in your gut flora, in which case you might want to try eating probiotic foods. But there's going to be a GI session at 3 o'clock Pacific today. So I would suggest joining that one if you have some specific GI concerns. From Rob. Is there a particular dietitian to work with, or is it common knowledge in the specialty? Ideally, every dietitian would be able to help with this, but that's not necessarily the case. There are a few neuromuscular specific dietitians like myself, but if you can't find one, just be sure to tell them that what you want is a diet that's appropriate macronutrients for your energy level, and then describe to them very honestly what you're currently doing and what's not working for you. And that will help that dietitian kind of steer you in the right direction to figure out what's going to work for you. Sorry, I'm going so fast. We have so many. I do not recommend a fasting diet ever for myotonic dystrophy, ever. And that's because the muscles need a constant flow of energy. And so what that means is you should be eating every 4 hours or so at regular intervals. You should always eat breakfast because we have a very long period of fasting overnight while we're asleep. So eating first thing in the morning and then about every 4 hours to avoid a fast. Good question. Okay, this is a really specific one about reflux. That's going to be individual. Okay, how many grams of protein to gain muscle mass? So this varies. In general, protein recommendations are weight-based. So in terms of kilograms, I'm not going to do the math really quick because I got to hurry up, but in general, anywhere from 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram. So you would take your weight, 190 pounds, divide by 2.2. That'll give you kilograms, multiply by 1 to 1.2. That's a very general recommendation. That's different for everyone. I do want to note that if your goal is to gain muscle mass, eating protein alone is not going to do it. In order to build muscle, you have to tear the muscle fibers and then eat protein. So eating protein will not put muscle on. You have to do resistance training type exercise in order to actually build muscle. So it's important to talk to your PT about that, in addition to eating protein. Vitamin D, generally 2,000 IUs per day. Some people have issues with diarrhea or loose stools. So the key for that one would be more soluble fiber. So if you have more loose stools, or you're going multiple times a day and it's very watery, I would suggest trying to eat more soluble fiber, and that's where something like Metamucil might help you. You also might have some food intolerances that you might need to get to the bottom of. It could be a gut flora issue where you need some probiotics. So there's not one easy answer for that, but there are a couple things you can try. But acutely, I would definitely recommend trying some soluble fiber to kind of thicken up the stool a little bit. And again, probiotics, the acidophilus is one of the easier ones to get, very popular. It's the same type of probiotic that you find in yogurt and kefir. Okay, I think we got through all the questions. Anything else? Oh, here's some more. Okay, thoughts on a gluten-free diet. A gluten-free diet is only necessary if you are celiac or have a gluten intolerance. But other than that, it's not going to really help you. Yeah, Phoebe answered the protein and muscle question. CoQ10, I do know a lot of people take that. There's no harm in it, but there's also not any definitive research that tells us it helps. Okay, and I just checked the other platform. All right, thank you everyone. You had some really great questions. I hope you learned a lot today.